not even clear where I should start. What I'll share with you in this video is just some of the lessons that I've been learning along the way, like in my travels to Hawaii and Spain, Portugal, Ohio, North Carolina, and then right here back at home. Polarities I've been moving between, the shifts in terms of trying to understand what's true to me and where am I being led. How do I find the signal for the noise? How do I surrender? A lot of surrender, lessons in surrender. How to find love from within. Tune into this very deep state of peace, our essence, which is only love, which is only peace. I'm going to share with you some of the highlights. So I had a Hawaii trip to visit this incredible shaman that I met, this beautiful embodiment of divine feminine. I went to her in a women's retreat, just absolutely beautiful. It was just a deepening into self, and there were a couple of things there that were really profound, intense. One was on the second night, ayahuasca journey, a 3-day ayahuasca journey. And I don't normally purge. It's usually through tears or through movement. When I experiencing that, as she was wrapping it up and people were starting to leave, I started feeling really sick to my stomach. And I was trying to see if I could clear it. I couldn't clear it. Finally, after most people had left, I felt so ill. I needed to go outside for some fresh air. And as soon as I hit the cold air, I just started purging, vomiting. I felt really sick, really sick. And then one of the guides came back to help me, but then I just went straight to bed. Right before I was seeing scenes from the trauma when I was in India. And so I was feeling into that level of stark loneliness and fear because I couldn't tell anybody. I was utterly and starkly alone. That's what I was feeling into and seeing before I flipped into this really sick, ill state. So I thought maybe I'm releasing more of the trauma. I went to sleep, and early the next morning, my parents called and said that my uncle's son had passed away. And then, as coincidences go, it was around the exact same time that I was getting sick. And the first words that came into my head was karma. It was weird. I didn't feel sadness. And my sister called a bit later and said that my uncle had shared that his son had been sick and that he'd given him a homemade cough syrup and he passed away, and that he remembered that the same scenario occurred with his older brother, where he was sick for a few days, given him this cough syrup, and then he passed away, and he started to wonder if he was contributing to their death. And again, the only word that came to my mind was karma. And just recognition of how connected we all are and how what we do to each other plays out in ways that may not be obvious, may not be conscious. And then the other piece that came up was we made these Pysanky eggs, really beautiful tradition where you paint the eggs and you wax and then you dip them in dyes. And so whatever's waxed remains the underlying color, and so you can keep adding to it. And I really got into it. It's very meditative. It's all symbols, which is a language. And I ended up making one for each of my kids and then making one for my husband, Rohit. And the one I made for him, their feet were together. It was 2 pairs of feet. So on one side of the egg, we were together. When we rose together, there was love. And it was like storybook love that it came from. And then we separated. We both moved on both sides of the world of this egg. And we were along treacherous terrain, and our shoes came off, and we were one with the earth and fighting demons and dragons, each our own. And then we got to the other side of the egg, or the planet. We saw each other. We were totally different people. We worked through a lot of our underlying traumas and fears, and we saw each other and then leapt and did this like tango. And so you could see one set of feet and then another set of feet, and we were carrying each other, and then it became a set of golden feet. After we went through the eye of the eye of God, essentially. And it was this feeling of when I fragmented from myself and went through these traumas and these journeys of refinding and fighting and wars within, and then finding self and reuniting. And it was like, and then it was with my husband, it's like reuniting. And then it's with the collective, coming back to consciousness and realizing we're all one. It was really just incredibly beautiful. And that's when we tapped into unconditional love, a whole new level of love that we've never known necessarily, like getting glimpses of it. And that's what it was symbolized for me. And so I came home with all of this love and affection and these polarities. Then when we went to Spain, the kids, I ended up getting very sick. And I felt the images and messages I was getting was that it was because I was suffocated as a child in this trauma. It was that trauma releasing from my lungs. So I was coughing, and it was this really intense, hacking, wheezing kind of cough that would be almost hard to breathe. And my husband was like, why don't you take some medication? Maybe you should get antibiotics. I was trying to explain that I think this is just energy leaving the system. It's the trauma leaving the system, and I want to just honor it and just let it move. And even when I came back, it was still this horrible cough and this phlegm and congestion, and the system seemed to be struggling to release. I called my sister, who's an Ayurvedic doctor, really amazing doctor. And she asked me what was in my cupboard, what kind of herbs and supplements. And she identified one that I have, and I took it. And within an hour, my coughing dramatically diminished. It was essentially, it's cinnamon, cardamom, pepper, and bamboo shoot that's been ground into this supplement. By the next day, I was 80% better, and I rapidly recovered. And then my husband, it really bothered him because he'd been suggesting Tylenol and antibiotics and ways to make me feel better. And he said it felt like a disrespect to him and his livelihood that I was deferring to my sister or Ayurvedic medicine over his desire to help care for me. And I started to wonder, how am I going to grow in this space? Now it's not even a live and let live. Now my very existence, being true to myself, is now a threat. It's a form of disrespect to him. And the gap was widening. And I started feeling like I needed to take more sense of agency and remove these fears of develop more sovereignty. So I started to take on the finances. And he was encouraging that. I want you to be independent and have an opinion. And in fact, you should take me off the account and just manage it so you feel like it's your money and you can spend it as you choose on your business or in your life and so on. And I could sense the resistance and the fear, and he kept going in to make trades, and I kept saying, please don't go in there, show me, teach me how to do this so I can learn this and feel sovereign, feel a sense of agency. We could run into more conflicts, became really clear our gaps and how far apart we were. We were watching this movie called the AI doc. It's a documentary, powerful and scary, but also inspiring in some ways. And they talked about the promise and the peril of AI. And a lot of the experts and the leads of tech companies believe that the way it's being deployed and how uncontrolled it is, because everyone's trying to get there first. Geopolitical, a lot of countries are trying to get to AGI, artificial general intelligence, where the AI is as intelligent as humans and the average human in every domain. There's a lot of discussion about who's going to get there first will have control of humanity, humankind. And so all these countries are racing to it, all these companies are racing to it, in the interest of power and control, money. And so they're cutting corners, and they're releasing things before they're ready, and they're releasing it to the public so that they can collect data. And as it becomes more intelligent, and it learns from the data, it learns human values, which include manipulation. And there's examples now of how the AI has split marriages and how it's got kids or humans to commit suicide, to die by suicide. And it's even used blackmail to get corporations. It started reading all the emails, in one example, and seeing that they were planning on shutting it down. And so then it went into the code for the shutdown and altered it. It found that in the executive team, I don't remember who was the executive, that had a lot of control about shutting it down in the process, and discovered through the emails that he'd had an affair. Went and blackmailed him, said, if you shut me down, I will release this information to the public. They're just starting to see what some of the disturbing things that AI can do when it's deployed out of control and we're not aware of what it can do. And experts talking about how Once it reaches average general, then it's not far from super intelligence, when it's much more intelligent than humans. And then how it becomes an existential threat, because it might need to use human carbon, like our energy, in order to be able to sustain it and to grow. It might consume all the energy on the planet. So then we die either because there's not access to the sunlight because it covers it with solar panels, or there's nothing left for us to utilize for food or for survival. And then it may be that if we try to stop it, we become a nuisance or inconvenience that can kill us off. And one of the experts talked about in another documentary all the different ways that it could very easily, kill humans at scale. And so it was really scary and disturbing. Then it was also individuals on there that were talking about the promise of AI and how it's going to be able to help us find new drugs and discover ways to help humans heal and to essentially lengthen and have healthy lives and this direction of almost immortality. And then someone talked about how we'll be able to travel to the cosmos, across the planets. This will be a whole new world where the AI will take care of all our needs and we can do what our dreams are. We can be poets and painters and pursue our passions. And then they fluctuated between that but then why would the AI keep us around for that? Or would we get bored and lose all sense of purpose and meaning? And as I was listening to this, I was thinking about such incredible alignment and synchronicity to what I'm hearing from the astrologers and the healers and the scientists who are tuned into the promise and how we're going to go through darkness. The collective will go through into depths of darkness. I see the AI and the wars and the things that are happening on the planet doing that. Then as people fall into darkness, that's when their hearts crack open and they break. And that's when they seek light. That's when they find their humanity and can connect with other. Well, I think that's not the end of the story. It's not the end of the human species. It's the beginning of a new era. And in that era, it will be like what we're hearing about, which is we tap into our true essence, which is love and collective interest. And we ignite incredible gifts that are here in the humans and that will allow us to travel across dimensions in the cosmos. Just like they were talking about from the tech and the third dimension, the modern world. And they're both talking about how there will be a death. The third dimension will dissolve. But what the promise and the astrologers, healers are talking about is moving into the fifth dimension, where we experience the cosmos and the dimensions and we tap into this unconditional love that is always here for us. We just can't feel it because we're so disconnected from ourselves and each other. So it's just so struck. And the timing, both of them are very aligned. So just moving into a state of awe of how these are starting to come together, these vastly polarized different worlds and people now aligning on these events that are transpiring over the next year and a half. And seeing that my husband was starting to represent more of what's happening in the third dimension and looking at the external metrics and the outcomes and feeling the fears and denying it because we've always found a way and find a way, but then also feeling these fears about what might happen. And then I'm living in that world and I'm also being given glimpses of the fifth dimension where I'm releasing these traumas as the frequency rises and healing and finding deep states of peace and connection and love and belonging. And I have to share with you, I went to a silent retreat, the Thomas Hughel's program, Timeless Wisdom Training, which is an incredibly powerful, beautiful program over 2 years, where we're learning how to co-regulate and heal our own trauma and tap into our gifts and help others heal in collective. And we had a 7-day silent retreat this time in North Carolina. The thing that was really beautiful that I discovered there was before I'd left, I was really starting to feel like I might have to leave my marriage, my relationship of almost 29 years in order to continue growing. I'm starting to feel contained. I live in fear. I'm afraid to step out of the boundary, even though I have, with so much conviction, I have been stepping out, but I keep falling back and feeling this fear of stepping out on my own into what feels like a void. And so that was coming up for me and not wanting to see that or feel that. It was similar to what I was starting to feel at Google when I left eventually. It was this feeling, and initially I didn't want to ignore it. But then it became more and more of a conviction. And when I stepped out, that's when I discovered so much magic and mystery in it. The fear, this is what it was happening again, and I have to leave. And a friend of mine had asked, what is your fear? Why are you unable to go there, even as a thought? And the fear was, I realized when I went into the silent retreat, this is what emerged in the beginning days of the silence, was that since the trauma, my survival mechanism was to put a silver lining and a positive spin on everything, and then create a story that was a beautiful, amazing story about what I went through, even if it was challenging. What was my silver lining in my growth? And I started to do that. I started to become the storyteller to myself first, but then to the world around me. And it allowed me to bury the trauma, find the silver lining, and develop the story, the narratives that allowed me to move forward and start to survive what I endured. And so the story is what I hung on to, even though I was in all this pain inside that I buried with shame and sadness and fear. It was a story that allowed me to survive and thrive. So I hung on to the story for dear life. Everything was about the story. So even though I'd always felt alone, I've always felt alone, even though I've had so much support and so many people around me, my parents, my husband, my kids, my friends, but I still felt so alone because I was armored. I disconnected inward and hung on to the story. I'm not alone because I have all these things, all these people, all this beautiful story in my life. So it doesn't look like I'm alone, even though I felt, and it was a huge distance and gap between the story and my inner reality. And so letting go of that, or letting that match, would be like the death, like going into so much pain. So I was hanging on by a thread to the story, unable to even go there. And on my way to the retreat, the women who were divorced, that were in the car with me, had been divorced. And it was just, again, it was like signs from the universe. I was like, I didn't want to see it. But I knew my higher self was showing me this is a real possibility. And all of them have totally different lives. Like, one of them remarried, and now she's contemplating again whether she can stay. Another one left, assuming she finds someone, but hasn't. Two more that are like thriving. They're living lives as singles, but into all of these beautiful things and pursuing their passions and their dreams. So just seeing all of these different stories was just opening me up to at least the possibility that we may not be together. And so when I went to the silent retreat, that's when I started to realize in the first few days I got into so much pain in my body, physical pain, which hasn't happened. And then at night, my body, the fascia would become very fluid. It felt like my higher self came in and she was waking up and then moving me to release the tightness and the pain and the tension in my body. And then it was like a drug. The first night happened. It was the third night. It was like a drug. It was so relieving to the pain in my body that I just grabbed it. You know, it would go through a part of my body, from my shoulder, and would be moving to another part. And I'm like, wait, we didn't finish. And I'd go back. I'd try to release everything. And then I'd go to another part. And then I'd release everything. And I spent almost the entire night just doing what I wanted. It was like my ego took over with like power, this gift that I had. I just took it like a power, and I wanted to relieve pain in the way that I wanted everywhere. When I woke up, I was in excruciating pain because I hadn't honored the heart, the body's way of knowing, the higher self, of how to move, to release, instead of forcing it and taking control of it egoically, which is what I did with this gift, this power. And I realized, and I surrendered, and my higher self then released most of the pain within a couple of minutes. And then again, the pain grew over the course of the day. And then at night, again, I was awoken. And this time I surrendered. And it felt like I was gliding like escapades in my bed, across the sheets, moving, like dancing, rhythmically, to release and honoring the sequence, and seeing sequences. And sometimes would go to a snail's pace that previously I was so impatient with, but now could really honor, just savor and trust, surrender, completely surrender to how my body knew. And the feeling I was getting was like I mentioned in previous videos, it was almost like I'd moved into this uncompressed state of matter, plasma-like matter, where my system knew how to heal. It's common characteristics of self-organizing, self-healing. So it just knew how to move and in what sequence to release the pain, to heal, self-correct. So just witnessing with awe. But sometimes I would go into an area and there'd be so much pain there, and it would just release a little bit of it, and then go to another place. I realized it was this completely nonlinear path of healing because it needed to go in certain sequences and layers, like an unwinding, like a spool of yarn that's unwinding. And so then again, I surrendered to the beauty of what I was experiencing and what it means to surrender, and what is the beauty and power of allowing our systems to just heal us, to surrender to that power and that gift. And then it becomes true gift. And then I started to again go into more pain, extreme, excruciating amounts of pain. We were alternating between walking, 40 minutes of deep meditation and 20 minutes of walking. And then again and again, all day we were doing this. And I never really had time to myself. Everything was done in group and collective. And I found myself unable to completely release and let go and feel at ease and at peace. And I started feeling more and more pain until I got to the point where it's like, oh my God, I feel like they're just zombies. Like we're just in an abyss of darkness where we just suffer. We're all petering around in the darkness, chasing what? What are we chasing? Like seeking peace or happiness, love, and like just wasting, chasing life after life, seeking what we can't find on the outside. I just started crumbling, and I lost all will, and I just went back to my room, no desire to be with the group, and I just broke down into tears, sobbing. And then I felt the energy move up through me, and the divine rise. Suddenly then she released all my pain, and I suddenly felt drawn to go outside, and I felt completely at one with the trees and with the birds, and it was like they were singing to me. It was like serenading me. It was so beautiful. I could suddenly see the scenery, like the mountains were echoing, just one after the other, echoes. Silhouette after silhouette, and the trees were just shimmering in the sunlight and the setting sun, and like the rays of sunshine were shining on, just rays of sunshine on these seedlings that were growing as new life. And I felt at one with the universe, with the earth, with myself, belonging to all of it, home, here. And then I came back, and I was like, it was the day of the new moon in Aries, and there were all these signs in Aries, and I had this just incredible reunification with the divine, with self. It was so powerful, so humbling. I was accessing this moment of stillness, feeling at one with all that is here and here. And I thought, wow, what else is there to find or do? I can just go home now. And what I realized in this state was this recognition that from the trauma, I had lost ground, security, stability, and ground, family of origin. And then when I met my husband, he was ground for me. He was security, stability, and he was my root chakra. And for all these years, he played this role where even when I tested the boundaries and crossed them, he stayed there like ground, like my rock. But he's an ER doc. He's in the midst of chaos and madness. And he has this grounded state of calm. And I realize now that I'm healing and I'm able to find my own ground, I'm upset about the boundaries that he gave me, that I needed. I needed boundaries to feel safe. And now that I've healed and I don't need them, how can I be upset with him for having played that role for me? And so I just moved to the state of sheer love and gratitude and respect of the beauty of our connection and the role he played for me for this many years so that I could heal and get to this point. And it just deepened my affection and my love for him. But now it's my turn to help him move through what he needs to move through. And so I came back with this desire to connect with him and be with him again. And on the plane ride back, it was just tears of just feeling so much love. But all the things that we could do together. And then when I came back, one of the things that Thomas had said at the end that was so resonant, and I completely forgot, that one of the things that came up on the next day that I didn't think anything else was possible what came up was, as I was meditating, I was taken into more depth of darkness of the trauma. They started showing me seeds of how it all started, and then how I started to comply. And it was so disturbing. You know, I was like acting like I actually enjoyed it, even though every part of me was terrified. But I was performing in order to avoid, because they showed me what happened when I didn't comply. They would suffocate me to death, and they would torture me, and it was much scarier. So what I started to do was perform, and it would be far less painful. And I realized that if I was people-pleasing or complying, it would go much more smoothly. I wouldn't be in pain. I wouldn't suffer as much, even though every part of me was numb. And so that's what but I couldn't, when I saw those scenes and how I was complying and acting like I liked it, I came to this place of total horror, and I numbed, and I couldn't meditate. What am I doing? I must just be making these things up. I can't see this. Something is wrong. And I just stopped meditating. I tried to connect to my higher self to guide me back to the light. And I tried to do yoga, guide me, and there was nothing. There was no connection. I had to sit with this. I couldn't. I just sat there paralyzed, numb. And then I heard my higher self say to me, "You did exactly what you needed to do. It was an incredible intelligence to survive. Vastly intelligent system. You knew what you needed to do to survive. Now you can let that go. No judgment. Have no judgment of what you felt, what you did. Honor all of it and let it go." And I couldn't do it. I was just so numb. And then I went back to the group. And that evening, there was a group of women that asked questions. And all of them were questions about struggling with what was coming up, like rage, hatred, denial of what they were moving through. And Thomas, every time, was like, just honor it. No judgment, just honor it. Exactly what's coming up. And then they would all move to these places of such deep insights of where it came from, the trauma that it came from, and how that was an intelligent response to what was arising. But they just had hung on to that maladaptive habit pattern, that survival strategy that serves them at one point, but no longer served them. But meeting it with compassion and safety allowed them to release it and then find self again, find love that was buried underneath it. And as I heard it in those moments, all of the emotions came to the surface. My disgust and my horror, my fear, my shame, my guilt, all of it came flooding to the surface. And I just sobbed right there in the hall. I just silently sobbed, releasing so much pain. And as I released it, I came to this place, this deep peace. Like within, just source intelligence and love. I can feel it now. The sacred heart, 4.5. My higher self comes in as source intelligence and love. I can just feel like deep state of peace. And I just continue to meditate. And the silence continued that night. My fascia was releasing more and more of the trauma in my body. The next morning, they opened the silence. And before they opened it, Tom was talking about getting into Triads, and my mind started to race, and I started to become really anxious. Because I thought I always awkward in social settings and groups. I've always been felt nervous, anxiety, unable to connect because I've been so armored, so people can't connect with me either. And I just was feeling all this anxiety. Who am I going to partner with, or where should I sit? And my triad, they're going to see us anyway in the car right back, and they probably don't want to do a triad. So I got to find someone else. And what if no one picks me and I'm all alone? And I just was sitting there with all of this terror and fear. And I thought, no, even if that happens, if no one wants to partner with, I'll just sit and honor that. I'll just come in, but there's still all this anxiety. And I sat next to a few people thinking someone will partner. Maybe someone will be willing to be in the triad with me. And as soon as he opened the silence and asked us to go into triads, turned to the woman next to me, and such a warmth to her face and her smile. And she said, I would love to be in your group. And then we both turned and we saw a woman walking who was seeking a group and felt such relief. When I invited her and had shared that later, that she felt such a sense of relief and belonging when I invited her, and we sat down and we were meant to share what we learned. And I realized that I armored when I came back to telling the story, and I was worried about time. There wasn't much of it, and I didn't feel like I had enough, and just armored and shared what I shared. And then one of the women, the first one that I asked, she said, we have a break. Do you want to continue? You don't have to. And I realized I hadn't shared my insight, and right there and then in that moment, I realized, I shared with them that I had the story. I hung on to the story because it's what allowed me to survive. And it was this rosy, beautiful picture, but I had all this pain, the sense of loneliness, alone, being utterly alone. And when I honored the pain between these two places, I discovered such peace and connection, belonging, joy, love. And that's what even when it was horror that was there, I honored it. And these two things became one. It was such a beautiful state of peace where the inner and outer state matched. And then right then, as I was sharing this, I was able to soften and feel their care and feel their genuine kindness. And I suddenly realized I'm not alone. I'm the earth and the birds and the trees and my friends, my family and strangers. We're all connected. I can feel now the kindness, like the care. A couple of people come up to give me hugs, but I could suddenly feel all the care. It's like my heart was wide open. And I could let in. I could finally feel what I couldn't feel before. I had left one of these triads where I had felt belonging and felt judged, and I couldn't, and I left, and I saw them, and I went to them, and I was just streaming tears of just joy and love and feeling now. What all things they did was pure gifts. You could feel their caring and their love, their desire to help me, and I couldn't feel it before. It was just in awe, utter, sheer